Press record. There we go.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Patricia. It's lovely to talk to you again and have one of our interesting conversations.
Yeah. Hi.
I thought today that we might talk about, I love the thumbs up. I don't know if you can see that when I'm speaking. It's quite interesting how Zoom works. I thought today about how we could look at the idea of putting off. So the things in life that we put off till we retire, or until we go on holiday, or until next week, or even just tomorrow. And I thought that might be something we could talk about, because I know we both work with people who will have sent us already, pretty detailed description of what's happened in their lives so far. And we're also aware, I think most therapists and practitioners and coaches, do get this thing where people want to tell their story. Of course they do. They've come to us because they're asking for help with themselves and their story. And I think that we need to find the story and acknowledge the story and the importance of it, but also then be able to move into now. And I know that one thing I've done with my clients for many years is, I can tell who needs to tell me more. And I can also see who could actually do with work right now, and that we could spend an hour easily of our session going through the story again. But in terms of them getting the best benefit from the session with me, I would like to do some work with them. So I will actually find myself saying in the best possible way for that person, oh, I really appreciate what you're telling me. I know how important that is to you. How about us thinking though right now about how you feel today? And what did it feel like when you woke up this morning? What are you thinking right now about what you want from today? Because that brings us right into what can we do to help today. If help's needed today, they might say, well, actually, I'm having a really good day. And that's another way into looking at what they're doing really well in their lives, what they're enjoying in their life, because that's something that's quite important too, isn't it? That we're not always talking about all the downside and the tough stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of our lives it's about acknowledging the good things, because we often sweep them to one side, don't we? So there's so much in here, but I thought we could start with this idea of how we put off and what we're already doing for ourselves in terms of the decisions we make every moment of every day. So what have you put off today, Patricia? Anything, or have you just done everything you wanted to do so far today?
I've actually been okay today. I've already prioritised my own health this morning. I've been to the spa, which I'm a member of, and I consider that not a luxury. It's kind of detoxing because I go in the sauna. I've then had a conversation with a colleague, and I've been planning some talks that I'm going to be doing. So I haven't put that off. I'm trying to think, I'm more likely to say yes to things than I am no. I'm often saying yes to too many things. So putting off things isn't my issue. It's more like, how do I manage all the things I've got in my life, and how do I discern which are the important things and which aren't?
That's really important, because really where I was heading with this, probably didn't put it terribly well, was not putting off things, but actually what are we sort of putting to one side in ourselves to look at later or to deal with later, so that people are saying, oh, well, I know I need to relax. We say, so what are you doing today to relax? Oh, well, I haven't got time to relax today, but in 4 weeks' time, I'm going on holiday and I'll be able to relax then. So that was what I meant by the sort of putting off, that idea that we know that we're not always making decisions that are best for us in the moment. And what can we do to help ourselves and other people to make good decisions for themselves all day long, every day? And that's quite a challenge.
One thing I like to say is that some of these choices are not conscious. What we put off and what we decide to do, how we make those decisions about what we prioritize and what we don't. So it's no good for me to sit down with a client and just say, well, you should prioritize your health and healing, and you should do less of this stuff that's obviously not helping you, whether that be an addiction or a behavior that's got a bit out of control. Makes no difference, because they're being driven by needs that are emotional, that are calling them, like it did with me, to overwork, or to, I think I said to you before, when I first started becoming a therapist, being so grateful when people wanted my help that I'd just say yes to everyone. And so ending up just overworking massively and so drained. And now I have to, notice that that's my tendency, because I like to be liked. I like to be needed. I have a need to be acknowledged, to be somebody important to someone else, So noticing that in myself, knowing that that's a tendency I have, and learning to calm it and respond to it. And that's what I do with clients as well. And I'll ask them, what's happened to you today? So we often, like you say, you collect a really long history, don't you, of everything that's happened in their lives. And some people go over sort of 6 or 7 or 8 pages. But what's happening to them today is indicative of what has happened to them before, because it's a pattern, it's a habit. And therefore, I think when working on healing, what's happening in the life is as useful to me as what's happened in the past. So I say, what's going on in your life is the healing. It's not the in-between until we get to the healing. It's actually part and parcel of what the patterns are that you've inherited, that you are unconscious of, that you are just running as a program, as we all do. So to find out where they are in this moment, what's working, what's not working, is so vital. And to feel it as well. Allow themselves time and space to have that awareness, so they tune into how they're feeling bodily.
Yes, I quite agree. And I think that's such a good way of putting it, because I've always felt the same in my work, that when I ask people, so how is it today? What's happened? What happened yesterday? It's bringing it to now, isn't it? So not for the purposes of living in the present and looking at, what it means to be present, although that's something we can talk about another time, because it's also vital. But actually using this as you say, this is where we are. This isn't, just like you say, an in-between bit until we get to a better place. This is life. Yeah. And in fact, what we're living today is going to be what we produce tomorrow. And if we don't like what it is today, we don't like how we feel and get in touch with those feelings, then that's the time to be doing something around, well, why am I doing these things? Why am I choosing these? What's happening to me? What has happened to me in the past that maybe has brought me to here? Or even just in a more positive sense of, what can I change right now? What could I choose to do differently? Even if it's just be aware of what I'm choosing and noticing who I am, noticing what I'm choosing to do. I know that my clients often used to laugh, if they met each other in workshops and things, and say, oh yes, as soon as I start speaking to Jen, I burst into tears. Yeah. And I say, yeah, because it's the first moment often for all of us. I'm just the same when I'm on that end of the therapy relationship. We're all the same. It's that chance to think, actually, yeah, well, I was out with my mum yesterday, and I came home feeling a bit flat, and that sets us off, doesn't it? Into, well, I wonder what happened there. Oh, well, yeah, it's always like that, or I always feel a bit let down, and that takes us into all that those life's patterns that you mentioned. The fact that we're living patterns all the time.
The only way we can change the pattern is by becoming aware of it. So when something's habitual, like most of our behaviours are, to be fair, we get so used to them, we no longer see them. And actually, I think the best thing about therapy is you give people the space, and you give them some of the tools. You give them permission to be with the feeling that they're noticing in their bodies. So say, taking your example, every time I meet my mother for coffee or something, I come home feeling flat and a bit negated, let's say. That's an important pointer to something that's probably always been going on. It's a belief that underlies that interaction. And you can't deal with that by willpower and just telling yourself to stop. There are a lot of programs out there, actually. I won't name names, but they work on stopping that thinking, right? You just tell yourself to stop, like it's volitional. It's not. It's a response to a threat that your body perceives. So it's actually an unconscious part of your brain. And what we have to do, first of all, is bring on your awareness to find that space where you can be with that feeling without judgment. where you can say, yeah, I feel angry at my mother actually, but she's always negated me. She never listens, and I feel nothing when I'm with her. And I know, and then I feel guilty that I feel nothing. Right. And then we can go back and explore how that has come about, what situations in the life have led to those belief systems. But you can't do that if you're not given the space and the awareness to actually drop in to that feeling. So that's where I start.
Yeah, that's such a good place to start, isn't it? And that awareness as well, that we don't give ourselves so much for our lives, really. We don't give ourselves the space because we're frightened to go there, or we just don't want to see it, or we don't even know how to look at it. So we don't give ourselves the space in our daily life, do we? So we look at life and think of how busy everyone is. People have all admitted that they've got busier and busier. You know, the washing machine was the most incredible invention, and the next thing we know, we haven't got time to do anything. You know, the washing machine's doing all the washing that used to take 2 or 3 hours. You know, that's an old story, but that's just the same with all our modern technology, isn't it? That we have more and more machines doing jobs for us, and yet we've actually become busier and busier, and that's because we're busy in our heads, aren't we? We're not just busy doing things in our lives, we're keeping the mind busy. And I suppose for a lot of people, that moment of space where they get asked how they feel is probably the first time for a while that they've even let themselves think about or notice even how they feel. Because what we've been taught to do, and society is constantly telling us this, all the adverts on television, all the hoardings we see everywhere, it's all about do this and you'll be fixed. You know, eat this chocolate bar and everything will be fine. You'll have a wonderful lover, a gorgeous house, beautiful skin, and life will be happy. You know, all from eating that chocolate bar. And we've got that, you know, that fixing things in every aspect of our lives, so that we feel a bit down. We think, well, what can I do? Oh, well, what? I'll watch a film then. Yeah. Because it takes us out of ourselves, and we can watch someone else's made up life or whatever it is we want to see. And we actually think we feel better for a while, don't we? But in a sense, what we seem to have done is switch ourselves off for a while. Yeah. Because we didn't really want to look.
I think we're afraid of looking inside, because we're afraid of what we might find. And the biggest fear I come across actually with people is once they've made the decision to come to therapy, I mean, there's quite another set of avoidances before they even get to you, you know, where they contact you and then they don't come, and then they contact you again and they still don't come. But once they've made that decision to come to you, the major fear I deal with is if I open that box, you know, Pandora's box of emotions that I've repressed or not dealt with, I'll be overwhelmed and I won't cope. And at least I've found a way, whether it's watching soaps or shopping, I've found a way of coping with it that kind of works. And what you're asking me to do is to abandon those tools and kind of look into things I really would rather not. And they're afraid of that. And with reason, because it is a bit scary when you first start. But I always reassure people that it isn't about opening the floodgates. That's not how it works. In fact, the brain is very, very clever about releasing just enough each time for you to handle. And so we can actually, we call it titration. It's basically, we gently encourage people to start to reveal aspects of themselves that have been hidden. Because I talk about it bringing the darkness into light. I know that sounds a bit esoteric, but you know, it's shining light in all the dark places, isn't it? For healing, I think that's what it is. So it's encouraging people to feel safe and listened to, heard in the space that you've provided, and that there's no judgment. If the emotions are uncomfortable or unacceptable to the person, which they often are, particularly if it's anger, for instance, or resentment. So there's many ways you can do it, but I think you have to start with allowing. That's where I come from, allowing anything that comes up to be okay, to be acceptable. And then we work through why and how it's come about, what purpose.
Yeah. And that's so important as well, isn't it? That allowing, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really essential point, because for so many of us, well, probably for everyone, to be honest, we're all brought up in such a way that we're brought up within guidelines or boundaries, aren't we? That this is the way we have to be, so that, you know, one family, anger is just something everybody does and they shout at each other.
Mm.
And in another family, they're all very quiet and they don't use that kind of thing. They don't, and anger is considered a problem. And I certainly know from my friends way back at university, for example, we used to talk about this. I was doing a psychology degree, so it was a great way of discussing all these different aspects of life. And, you know, you'd find that you'd have a relationship with a friend who was perfectly happy to get angry and shout at people, or not even shout, but, you know, just be cross. Whereas I can remember, if someone was cross, oh, I was devastated. I just thought I'd done something really wrong, or that life was falling apart. But for that person, it was just a way of expressing how they felt in the moment, and then they were fine. And then they carried on life. Whereas for me, I was left with the awful, washed out feeling, you know, that you can have with all those emotions of, what did I say that was wrong? What, you know, what upset them so much? You know, what in life for them is so difficult? You know, what part am I playing in that? And so just that different way of allowing emotions to be shown. We think our life is a normal one, don't we? I was reading something again the other day, just this lovely little point, that the family we grow up in, whether or not we think at the time we like our family or not, we do just think that's how families are. So that is what life apparently is. We don't, especially when we're small children, we don't have anything else to judge that by. So that if we're in a family, you know, that where there are a lot of secrets, for example, that is just how life is. It's how it feels, it's how it looks. If we're feeling criticized quite a lot of the time, or left out, or alone, or all those different possibilities, then we just think that's how life is. So of course, I think it's kind of amusing to me that people, and even in literature sometimes, in textbooks, you find this idea that it's almost sort of surprising that we get into adulthood and we've got all this stuff. Well, of course we do. You know, where were we going to let it go? When was it going to disappear? You know, we don't just empty our brain out when we're in puberty or something. You know, it's all still there. Of course it's going to be affecting us right through our lives.
Yeah.
And in a way, if we can shift that round to starting to observe it with that help, and with the allowance that whatever it is, we can still say it, we can still describe that experience or that emotion, then it can actually start to get quite interesting. I mean, even exciting and fun eventually, can't it? And I certainly got to that point where oh wow, another belief I didn't even realize that I've been harboring all these years, and what an effect it's been having on my life. So it actually can get to be fun, even though there are always those difficult moments in there where we realize I haven't been wanting to see that, have I? You know? And so I think even just recognizing that what we thought was, in inverted commas, normal, was just the norm in our particular circumstances is a really good start, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge landscaper of your brain, isn't it? What you've grown up with, and you've imbibed those values, those beliefs, even without trying. You didn't need to consciously download them. They're happening anyway because you're observing what's going on in your environment, and these people are emotionally important to you. So when you first come into the world, they are physically important to you because you need their support and their care to survive. But beyond that, as you start to grow, the emotional part of your brain is starting to develop, and you're beginning to make social interactions and judgments of people, and who's safe and who's not, and what's normal and what's not, based on the feelings you have when you're around these people. So it really is it's such a big part of who we are, is where we've come from. And I love, you know, your example of anger. And I grew up in a family where my parents never argued. I can't remember a time when they had a row. I can't remember it. They just didn't. They were just easygoing, regular couple, but they just didn't argue. It wasn't in their lexicon. And going to a friend's house where her mum and dad were clearly not happy, and in fact divorced very soon afterwards, having a stand-up row and him running after her into the garden and her screaming and crying. And I was frozen, absolutely frozen. I remember that, going, because I'd never observed anything so terrifying. And my friend was just like, yeah, this is par for the course, this is what happens at the weekend. And remembering the effect on me. So it is about what you regard as normal, isn't it? And then learning as you grow up and interact in a wider sphere, how to negotiate your way in the world with the understandings that you have that may not fit your new environment, which is what happened to me going to university. All these super confident people, who just all their siblings had been, they all understood it, they knew what was expected of them. I didn't even know, I had no idea what to expect. And it was a really big shock. And I was very shy, So, yeah, negotiating emotions during that time was a really, really difficult thing for me. So I totally understand.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Because we not only have these values and beliefs, this way of living that has become the normal living for us, but we then, as you say, go out into the big wide world, and the world has all these different normals in it, and we kind of very quickly as well think that we're somehow abnormal, or that we're a bit weird or delicate or different, and often as soon as we start to judge ourselves as different, the natural human tendency, which we could look at maybe is where that comes from, but I think it is a fairly natural human tendency to judge ourselves on a negative side. So we don't go, I'm different and I'm absolutely wonderful. The tendency, yes, we can do, and I have met some people who feel that way, but most of the time we tend to think, I'm different, so I'm not worthy in some way, I must not be able to cope very well, or I'm not cut out for this kind of life, or it's all too difficult. And that's where that self-judgment and those sort of stereotypes become quite negative, don't they?
Yeah.
Where if we feel that people around us can cope with anger, and we're a delicate flower who can't, that puts us in this category straight away that then we maybe don't really feel we fit into, but we don't know how to be anything else.
No, we've not learned how to either adapt or acknowledge and honour ourselves, and so we're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. We're neither like them, but we don't like ourselves very much. So we end up in shame, and shame is a very destructive emotion that says, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I'm different, I'm wrong, I'm bad. And shame, I have a box on my intake form that says experience of shame or something, and very few people tick that because they don't really know what it is. Because shame doesn't announce itself like anger or sorrow. It doesn't say, hi, I'm shame, here you go, bam. It gives you lots of other things. It gives you a sense of not being enough. It stops you, it sabotages you from sticking up and saying, this is me, I like me, here I am. It can give you anxiety, depression, pain, physical pain. So it announces itself in many, many different ways, but it's so common because we haven't adapted ourselves to this new environment in a way that feels congruent with us. In other words, we feel like we don't fit. And there are so many people out there, aren't there, that are living lives where they don't feel they fit their life. And this is a massive stress. And we have to find them a way to come back home to themselves. I think that's the biggest journey any of us make in therapy. And I speak as somebody who's had therapy, and not just who does it, but someone who's come home to themselves is someone who's perfectly at ease in their own skin, who acknowledges their imperfection, but knows that that's enough. They're here for a purpose, and they know what their purpose is. And they don't really let other people's opinion of them stop them doing what's important to them.
Oh, that's so vital, isn't it? I'd love to look at this in a future conversation, because it takes us to where I've been studying some information recently about this idea of self-esteem, and how the old idea somehow was that if you've got good self-esteem, everything's fine and life looks wonderful and you're, but actually having low self-esteem can, we can look at that another time. But this idea of being comfortable with ourselves, with, we used to say warts and all, not making warts actually, but that idea that just as I am, so that recognizing that I have these ways of living, I have these beliefs that I trust. I've got other beliefs I've been letting go of because they weren't helping me very much. And I recognize there are tendencies that are still there, but I notice. So I think it brings us back to what we said at the beginning about being able to notice, because if we're not frightened of finding the person that we are inside, then we can allow ourselves to notice, can't we?
We can.
If it's not there, we can then say, well, actually, I know what I find sometimes I don't necessarily have to like, but it doesn't mean I don't like me. I can see things, oh, that's not very useful behavior to be doing, or that response is maybe a bit more of a reaction than a response. I wonder what's happening there. But being able to look at ourselves and still appreciate that I am who I am and I don't want to be anyone else. I actually like being me. And that's something that I know many people don't feel, they wouldn't say that. And I've talked to clients about that. And it's not because I'm some magic person who solved all her issues by any means. I'm looking at these things all the time. And I'm not just analysing myself all the time. I'm just seeing it through my life. And I actually like being me. I like what I found in myself, and I like the fact that there's loads more to discover about who I could be, who I can allow myself to be, what I can play with.
Beautiful.
And that, I think, is a very kind of exciting way when we've started to release this fear around what we might find.
Yeah. My final word is about our lives are a reflection of our inner beliefs, if you like. We tend to think we live a life that's external to us, and fate or bad luck is what dictates what happens. But I really think when you change the inner energy around who you are and who you could be, I love the idea of allowing who you could be, life tends to fit more around you. Things flow better. Events and people come to you that you couldn't have imagined before. I mean, look at me doing this. This was not in my game plan to be a therapist. But it came to me through my own experiences and my own journey to find myself, not in that new agey way, but to find out who I am and what I do well and what I don't do well, because you have to look at the whole picture and find a life that fits me. And I think I'm still working on it, but I'm closer than I've ever been. And so leaning into finding out who you are is at the essence of recovery and healing. So just to say to people, it's not scary, it's beautiful, and we just need to encourage more people to do it, because we need a world that's less wounded than it is right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's such a lovely point, the fact that our world, the world that we live in, does reflect what's inside us, and it changes as we change. So that's the glory of it, is the fact that, I don't think that happens by magic. I think it happens because of our perception and how we look at the world and how we interact with the world around us as well, and what we're saying yes to and what we're saying no to. So there's a really good one to talk about in the future, about how often by saying no to ourselves, because we don't want to look at who we are, we don't want to see any of the pain, we're also saying no to all that stuff in the world that we might quite like to see and have in our world. So we'll have a think about that another time. But that's been a real pleasure today, Patricia. I've already got about 10 different aspects that we could look at in the future, which I'm sure we will do. So thanks ever so much for that conversation today.
Oh, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.